On this edition of the program, a big shakeup at the State Department. We check in on Doge and what the hell is happening at the DNC. Gabe Kaminsky of the Free Press joins us. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for April 25th, 2025. I don't know why I'm singing. It's your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you from Austin, Texas. We are going to be joined by one of my favorite investigative reporters. I've been a fan of his work for a while, and I'm happy to have him on, and I'm even more happy to have him on when they have broken a huge story. He's going to talk about it, but the State Department, what for my money, next to defense, is the most austere, untouchable department in the president's purview, is getting a dramatic headcount reduction. What is it? Is it legal? We talk about that, talk about just in general, the state of Trump's reduction in force for DC. Really, really, really good chat. Before we get started, though, I want to ask a question. What in the hell is going on at the DNC? The vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, David Hogg, announced that he is going to, through an outside group, spend $20 million to primary sitting Democratic candidates. That's through his PAC Leaders We Deserve. Not so fast, says DNC Chair Ken Martin. Martin is pushing for a rule requiring DNC leaders to avoid partisan primary involvement, a direct response to Hogg's group. If passed at the DNC's August meeting, the rule would force Hogg to choose between his vice chair role and political activism. Hogg has vowed to fight for his position, but may step down. Separately, Martin announced $1 million in monthly allocations to state parties aiming to decentralize DNC resources and strategy. So, it's hard to run the rules, to be the referees and also be a player. David Hogg was a controversial pick to begin with. And he has been criticized not only from people across the aisle, but from people amidst the Democratic coalition. Hell, with people that also survived the school shooting. He survived at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and then went on to become activists along with him. He was criticized by them, okay? He doesn't appear to be somebody who has a tremendously sterling reputation, at least in terms of a professional capacity. But the idea that you would center yourself in something like this is crazy. And at the same time, I think he's right. I think he's dead right to say that the Democrats would be better off running some of their incumbents out. Now, I think that's only half the solution. The question is who they are replaced with, because the one thing about incumbents, especially ones that have been elected multiple times, and he's going after old people, so they have been elected multiple times, is that they tend to win. And when you are talking about things like the House, which because of gerrymandering, because of negative partisanship, I don't know if we're going to see gigantic swings like we have in the past where one party has a 30-seat lead, a 40, 50, 60-seat lead. I don't know if we're going to see that anymore. I think you're probably going to see something that is like a sub 20 sub 30 seat lead. But that means that each and every seat really matters. So if you're taking out a safe incumbent and you're bringing up somebody that has not won that seat before, yeah, in all likelihood, especially in some districts, they're probably going to win. But you never know. You are opening up the door to chaos. But such is the life of a man living high on the hog. Let's go ahead and get to Gabe Kaminsky. I would like to welcome to the program an investigative reporter for the Free Press with a big scoop about the State Department. Gabe Kaminsky, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So there's been a lot of conversation, obviously a lot of digital ink spilled about reduction of the size and scope of the federal government under Donald Trump, and specifically a lot about USAID and the State Department. But you obtained internal documents and then on the record comments from Marco Rubio and other State Department officials. What is happening?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. So what we reported at the Free Press earlier this week was that the Department of State, which is the largest foreign policy agency in the United States, the leading foreign policy agency, we reported that the Trump administration is doing something called a reorganization of the State Department. They are massively restructuring the Department of State. And so part of that means they are eliminating roughly 130 offices in Washington, D.C., many of which focus on issues or were launched to focus on issues such as like furthering human rights, advancing democracy, or countering terrorism or extremism. The State Department is also moving offices, and they are instructing top officials to reduce their staff by about 15%, which could lead to probably, I would say, in the neighborhood of, it could be thousands of people, career officials potentially losing their jobs. Now, in the telling of the State Department, the goal here is not to eliminate working on issues that they would still say are important, let's say human rights, or in the example of one office being eliminated to investigate war crimes. They're saying they want to consolidate programs.
Yeah.
Because in their telling, at least in their telling, they are saying that, the State Department is very large and they want to shrink it and have offices that overlap, engage in similar functions. But that's an argument that is not held by critics.
Not held by everybody. Yeah. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about it. Just to give people a sense, because 137 offices is obviously a large number. Yeah. How much of the State Department is that? How many offices in total are in the Department of State?
Yeah. So the State Department has about more than 700 offices. And so this is about actually a roughly a 17% reduction of its offices in the United States. So it is a notable, that is a notable number. It actually, what we reported conflicts with prior reporting from the New York Times. The New York Times reported 2 days before us that on a leaked draft executive order from President Trump that they said was going to close embassies and consulates and focus on like this, some sort of foreign reorganization. The State Department rebutted that story and said that is not actually what's happening. And the documents that we reported that were confirmed by outlets conflicted with the New York Times had related to foreign offices. These are all domestic offices in the United States.
These are all DC offices, and many of them. How many of the shuttered offices were created, over the last 20 years or so? Because in reading through your piece, that was part of a trend that I seem to pick up when they're talking about offices that were open, and all of these have incredibly important names to them, like you mentioned, stopping war crimes and stuff like that. But it's not necessarily that it is America turning away from that mission. It is just that there's 3 or 4 other departments that also do part of that. So you shouldn't have multiple different offices doing it.
So an example would be some of these offices. There's an office called the Bureau it's called the CSO. It's aiming to counter extremism, and it was launched by President Barack Obama at the height of ISIS's power in the Middle East, with the goal of sort of trying to create messaging domestically or overseas to, I guess, like thwart this rise of extremism in the Middle East. That office, in the telling of the department, kind of overlaps with other areas. And then also because of the State Department's reduction of their footprint and pulling out of Afghanistan and other areas in the Middle East, they don't think that they need that. But others examples, there's an Office of Global Criminal Justice that's the War Crimes Office I was noting. That office, which has a smaller budget, I believe it's like $5 million a year, something in the neighborhood of that. That office was created, I believe it was under President Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. So I would say some of these offices, these are offices that the State Department says are not authorized. They were not authorized through Congress. They were sort of created by presidents. And that's why they do have the power to be able to shift or eliminate some of the offices, but there is a nuance there with USAID, a major office.
So yeah, and let's get to that now, because there's a lot of conversation, obviously, about USAID as an organization that was apart from the State Department. Now, obviously, through legal challenges and much protest, there's a shifting of that to under the State Department. What is the fate of USAID in this reorg?
Yeah, so USAID is, this massive humanitarian aid agency. It was launched by JFK in 1961, and it was later authorized through Congress, which made it an independent agency. And so under this reorganization at the State Department is moving the State Department prior to this, I think it's important to note, has been gutting USAID's contracts overseas. The Trump administration has been gutting their contracts and firing staff, and it's set off a whole frenzy in Washington. And this is moving functions of USAID into the State Department. So it's been a separate agency. They're moving it into the State Department. And another really notable thing is that under this State Department restructuring, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is still listed on an organization chart that we obtained as the acting the administrator or director of USAID. Okay. And the reason for that is because in order for him to have that title removed as being the leader of this agency that's now in the State Department, Congress actually would have to take action to under the law statutorily close USAID. And so the Trump administration is able to fold USAID into these bureaus and kind of do this like de facto dismantling of this agency. But in order for it to be under the law, this agency gone, Congress would have to take action.
And that is a big distinction that you made, is that all of these decisions that are being pushed for the State Department, at least as of now, are within the purview the administration believes with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, right?
Yeah. And so I think it is interesting. And I was talking about this on another program. It's like the State Department is, they're being kind of creative. So they're saying we're moving USAID's functions into these other bureaus, but Congress still has to be the one to dismantle it. But they're already basically gutting the agency. And I think that's the criticism from Democrats. They would say, sure, you're saying we have the power to kill this agency, but you're killing our contracts, you're firing staff. Yes. I mean, a lot of our functions are being sort of like stripped. So what kind of, by the time it gets to Congress, they're going to be like, why would we keep this agency? It's like, it doesn't even basically exist anymore, So it's a weird dynamic. And I think there's going to be more legal challenges about what exactly like the future of that agency would be.
It feels like that is its own cottage industry right now. It's just legal challenges to the Trump administration's actions, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Let me ask some big picture questions here. When is the last time that we saw any kind of reduction in force of this level in the State Department? Did you get any sense of that in your reporting?
So the State Department communicated, the Trump administration and some career officials at the State Department who are working on this issue, so people who are not appointed by President Trump, They believe that this is sort of the most significant shakeup there they framed it as decades. They believed about 30 years. Prior to that, I believe under President Bill Clinton, there has been, I would say, I'm not entirely sure what is tantamount to this, but there has been different, like the State Department has sort of shifted around offices for like years, and they've sort of moved they have these 6 bureaus, and they focus on like political affairs, public diplomacy, and the Human Rights Office, which many of that is being dismantled or moved elsewhere. And they've often shifted them around. I mean, I think this is for me, it really stands out as far as in recent memory of just like a real, particularly with the U.S. aid, which since, has been an agency since the 60s.
Yeah. And it's been a hobby horse on the right for a very long time. We've joked about on this show that, like, the stock USAID joke is like this amount of money for this ridiculous cause in this foreign country. Right.
There was a point in time when everyone on the right was like, this funds USAID, everything funds USAID. And there was the whole scrutiny over Politico. Politico, the news outlet, they run, trade publications, E&E News. They focus on energy and environment types of reporting. And agencies subscribe to that because agencies, of course, want to have good information, like, whether it has maybe E&E News, Republicans will say, it has a little bit of a slant. I don't know. I think they publish a lot of, important news. And so probably administration would subscribe to that. And so there was this whole scrutiny of, USA and all these agencies are bankrolling Politico. And it's like, well, they're subscribing, outlets and politicians pay for news. Like if you go to Federal Election Commission records and search conservative media outlets like the Washington Examiner, or like the Daily Caller or others, you'll see that campaigns will like subscribe. Like Trump's campaign paid the Washington Examiner a lot of money the last election cycle because they want to read the magazine. It's not that crazy.
They don't want to hit a paywall. They're busy. They want to be able to read what they want to read.
That whole thing was ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was, that frenzy, that initial Doge frenzy was just kind of insane, where everybody was their own Sherlock Holmes with the spreadsheets trying to find anything that looked like a red herring and then screaming and yelling about it on social media.
Right.
So when it comes to the State Department, another big picture question, I've, from afar have seen the State Department continue to grow in influence. It is obviously one of the most prestigious roles that you could be appointed in the cabinet. It puts you next to, America's interest abroad, and is very, very important. Where is this kind of a humbling of the State Department that it's getting reduced on this level? Because we have not seen, at least yet, similar headcount reductions for some of the other departments.
Here's how I think it, as far as like big picture, how we kind of can look at this. I think it goes back to what we started talking about, or what you had brought up initially, that this is really part of a broad movement across the Trump administration and they're telling, through this Musk-led, and Musk is now leaving. That's maybe another thing to talk about. Musk is leaving Doge, but to, cut a lot of federal programs and to fundamentally change how the government is sort of operating, laying off a lot of career officials, trying to force a lot of people to get back in offices. After COVID, there was a huge movement of people working remotely. So I think we look at this in terms of not just the State Department, but like the various ways that the Trump administration, like we reported at the Free Press, I believe it was last week, we reported on a whole story in another way that the government is sort of overhauling programs. They are investigating or eliminating tens of millions of dollars in funding related to thwarting alleged misinformation or disinformation. And those are kinds of programs that Republicans say censored. Conservatives, Democrats say they sort of rebut that and say there's perhaps some programs have been, targeting speech, but like by and large, they say, okay, well, these programs are good to study like falsehoods on the internet or whatever. Yeah. So it's there. I guess that example I think is like another way they are. That's across agencies. The National Institutes of Health, the State Department is gutting all of those programs. So, every day, like Doge or there's Doge, like accounts for all these federal agencies on Twitter. And they're like, we have saved another X amount of money cutting these programs. So it's a very sprawling effort. And yeah.
For as long as I've been alive, especially people on the right side of the aisle when they run for president talk about reducing the size of the federal government. Give us a sense from your perspective covering this, if what we are seeing now really has any modern precedent.
I think that conservatives for decades in Congress have tried to cut federal spending, particularly, like fiscal hawks and the groups like the Freedom Caucus. They have sought to reduce the federal deficit and in many ways failed to do so. Cutting
that number continues to go up no matter how much
money
people
keeps
pound the
going.
table about
Budgets,
it.
and it's not new. There were efforts in prior administrations to cut spending. I don't think the Biden administration they spent a lot of money, but in prior administrations there were big efforts to cut spending. And they've run into roadblocks. And the big roadblock that this administration is inherently going to run in is that there's only so much money that does not run through Congress. Most money. So, entitlements, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, defense spending. These make up the most portions of the federal budget, Social Security. And that passes through Congress. And so in order for Musk and Trump and Doge to really cut the amount of money that they want to be able to reduce from the federal deficit or save to taxpayers, they would need to tap into programs that President Trump himself has said he will protect or increase. So Trump actually announced that he wanted to the biggest defense budget in history, $1 trillion defense budget. So that I don't see how they're going to cut. Musk has said he wants to cut $1 trillion. I don't see how they're going to cut. It's not going to happen, right? If they're increasing budgets. So I guess just as far as this agency, this administration, there's the separation of powers, like any, is a roadblock.
Well, yeah. And obviously you're seeing, like we pointed out with, USAID, that there's, there's damaging a program. So then by the time that somebody would look to fund it again, it might not be worth funding, or you might want to start up a whole nother thing because this version of it has just kind of died on the vine. And then there's obviously, this is an administration that's being very, very aggressive in interpreting how much they have leeway on the federal headcount and the federal workforce. This is like my new hobby horse with anybody who I know who was in DC, but like, it appears that universally, like this is materially kind of changed the town over the last few months since the inauguration, these firings, because DC is a company town in many ways. And this is a lot of people that are let go in the same time.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's a lot of contractors that are being impacted, like whether it's defense contractors or contractors that work with like the National Institutes of Health, on like medical research. And this, to even put it in broader perspective, the Trump administration has extended kind of this effort to, go after government funding to like universities. And that's been a really big push. So there's been this whole back and forth with Harvard University. There's been a back and forth with Columbia over cutting their funding related to what the administration says is like anti-Semitism on campus. The Harvard thing is really interesting because in the case of Harvard, there was reporting that the administration like accidentally had sent a letter to Harvard threatening their funding, and then Harvard responded to it and was
reacted to it. It was like an oopsie, and then they stood on it.
Yeah. And then it set off this sequence of events, and now it's so that was super bizarre. So in some cases, right, they're playing a little fast and loose. They're also like issuing a lot of threats to groups. There was a lot of speculation in Washington, D.C. over the past week or so, I was hearing from like nonprofit sources, and the Times also had reported a bit on this, is that there was people thought there was going to be an executive order coming down investigating nonprofits for tax exempt status with the IRS, whether it related to groups working on like diversity, equity, and inclusion in the nonprofit sphere, or like climate issues, energy issues. And we haven't substantiated the rumor that there's an executive order coming on that issue. But it does show that there's a groundswell of groups now that, because of they're having this kind of the administration like going after so many tentacles of government funding, they're all kind of like thinking, oh, are we next? You know, people are reaching out to us. Oh, hey, have you heard anything? Like, you know.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Head on over there, get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Let's get to some stories that we didn't have a chance to touch on. Nearing the 100-day mark of his second term, President Trump is pressing Ukraine to accept a peace deal with Russia that would require conceding significant territory, aiming for a quick foreign policy win. Though he insists he's pressuring Russia too, Trump focuses more on urging Ukraine to settle, citing the goals of saving lives and ending the war. The proposed deal would freeze battle lines, hand Russia about 20% of the Ukrainian territory that it has pushed into, and lift sanctions, while Ukraine would receive a European-backed security guarantee. Trump dismissed demands to return Crimea, criticized Zelensky's public stance, and blamed Obama for past inactions. Former NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg and Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store met with Trump to stress the geopolitical consequences of appeasing Putin. While Trump claims Putin is committed to peace, he warned that U.S. patience is wearing thin and hinted at a looming deadline behind which he might reconsider America's posture in the conflict. So a lot going on with this. The details of the peace plan were filtering out through the news media over the last 48 hours. I've read a couple different takes on it. The kindest thing that you can say about it is that it is a frank realization of where they are right now. Russia will not be pushed back beyond the borders of what they took, except for, I believe, Kursk. That is something that in this deal, the Russians would have to vacate. But other than that, they're going to take territory, and Crimea, which was seized years and years and years ago, will be du jour recognized as Russian territory. Now, the most critical thing that you can say about it is that it is a capitulation to Putin, and that Putin essentially doesn't have to pay much of a price for what has been a tremendous a consequential push into a land war on the European continent. He gets to keep the area that he took. He gets Crimea du jour recognized. And this is most important, sanctions with the United States will be lifted. So beyond our military pushing in to support Ukraine, the United States military supporting Ukraine against Russia, the sanctions are the biggest tool that we have, because Russia's economy is not going great. And at a certain point, they are going to feel a tremendous strain. So the ability to interact with the Western world is something that they are going to be desperate for. But how desperate? Well, that's the question. Because Russian missiles hit Kyiv yesterday, as I record this, Wednesday night. Donald Trump said that he was not happy with it. My take on it is this. What's the other option? We can continue a war that is pretty clearly at a stalemate, or we can figure out some kind of off-ramp. It seems pretty clear, though, that if the Ukrainians do go along, it is not going to be happily. A federal judge has blocked key parts of a Trump administration order requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote, citing potential voter disenfranchisement. U.S. District Judge Colleen Collar-Cotley issued a preliminary injunction halting implementation of the lawsuit filed by groups including the ACLU. The blocked provisions include mandatory documentary proof of citizenship and requirements for public assistance recipients to verify citizenship before accessing the federal voter registration. However, the judge allowed Trump's measures tightening mail-in ballot deadlines and allowing federal agencies to compare immigration and voter rolls to stand. Critics argue that the order promotes baseless conspiracy theories and unlawfully infringes on state authority over elections. The ACLU called it part of a broader assault on democracy. Trump's administration insists the executive order aims to protect election integrity. Opponents warn it imposes a burden on eligible voters lacking documentation like passports. A final ruling on the order's constitutionality remains pending, and that is probably going to be another Supreme Court case. We're probably going to see this in the Supreme Court as well. But, you know, again, I'm just saying, can we sell the decisions for all the Supreme Court cases, for everything that's happened in the first 100 days? Sell it to Netflix. You want to start paying down this debt? Let's go. Get Sarandos on the phone. Finally, because we are not going to have another main show episode before this happens, a hat tip to our Canadian friends who head to the polls on April 28th in a high-stakes election that could reshape the country's leadership and its tense relationship with the United States. Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former central bank chief new to electoral politics, faces conservative Peter Poilievre, whose populist rhetoric echoes Trump but has distanced himself from the former U.S. president. Trump's tariff and rhetoric, especially his suggestions of annexing Canada as a 54th state, have strained U.S.-Canadian relations, energizing liberal support, which is amazing. Over 7.3 million early ballots have already been cast. Carney called the snap election after succeeding Justin Trudeau, aiming to solidify his mandate. Canada's electoral system elects MPs by district, and the party with the most seats forms the government. Key election issues have included trade, cost of living, and healthcare, and each party proposing plans to counter Trump's tariffs. Trump, meanwhile, has expressed indifference toward the outcome while taking swipes at both Carney and Poilievre. So, we talked about this a little bit with Evan Scrimshaw. I'm just going to give you my general thought on this. I can't believe that the opposition party that's been out of power for over a decade, when things go bad for Canada, can't capitalize on it. That's crazy to me. That's just insane. And I don't know the ins and outs of Canadian politics. I'm looking at this from a very, very, very high level perspective. But you have to have the worst messaging if, when cost of living is sky high, you are in a toxic relationship with your biggest trading partner, and the prime minister resigns, that you can't take advantage of that. Now, I'm not going to suggest how the Conservatives could have run their campaign, because to be totally honest with you, I don't know how they did it. I've seen like a few ads trickling in. I've seen some of the liberal ads trickling in, and they all center around the idea that Mark Carney is a fighter who's going to keep America off the back of Canada. That's fine. But you're telling me that Poilievre couldn't have said, hey, look at where we are right now. We got America calling us the 51st state. That's ridiculous. Why are we in an antagonistic relationship with America? The liberals. Why is the cost of living so high? The liberals. So now they fired Justin Trudeau. They shuffled him out of here. They got this new guy in here, and they're going to just assume that because they've changed leadership, that we're going to hire the arsonist to rebuild our house. Why? It's ridiculous. It's the definition of insanity. Going back to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. So yes, we have the better solutions. Yes, I will negotiate with President Trump and I will bring back a fair deal to Canada because we need to have our seat in the international arena. We need to have a good relationship with the United States. And whether that is a firm hand or whether that is a conciliatory hand, I will always put Canadians first. And then, whatever, Canada-specific issue. Fill those in there. I don't know what happens. I don't know what you guys fight about. It's kind of crazy to me because usually you can rinse and repeat that scenario anywhere in the world. Party out of power takes advantage of party in power not being popular. But they've totally let this 51st state thing run them over. They could not seem to handle it. So maybe, the iron law of the party out of power taking back, the parliamentary lead, maybe that still happens. But right now, at least according to all the polls, it does not appear so. So head to the polls, Canada. We'll see what happens next week. That's it for your update. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you go to support this show. Let's get back to Gabe. It's kind of crazy that a lot of stuff that I've, followed just covering politics that have largely been on the right, discussing things like dark money networks that are connected to, USAID possibly, that, you mentioned the censorship office that is like a cause du jour of people like Mike Benz online. These are things that are actually being taken very seriously and targeted by the administration. And, part of me can't help but wonder, it's like, all right, is this just because it's popular online? This is a very online administration, and now they are poking in under the hood. But then again, you see stuff like the Harvard thing, and it's like, all right, well, how much of this is all just ready, shoot, aim? You're going so fast with this that you have no idea what's going to be happening on the other end.
They're moving very fast, and I think, I don't think that I wouldn't want to frame it as, everything they're doing is fast and loose and unnecessary. Like, I think we can objectively look at, in the case of USAID, I think it is fraught, and I think it is unclear with all these programs, like if they have the authority to slash it. But there have been objective problems with USAID, and USAID has an inspector general's office, like other agencies, that investigates it and publishes reports on findings. And that inspector general office has found, a lot of significant issues over the years. Like under the Biden administration, USAID gave significant amounts of money to UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency. And the United States government and Israel have both substantiated and reviewed documents that have showed that officials at this UN agency sort of were actually double dipping with terrorist organizations to Hamas to participate in the October 7th terrorist attack. So that's that's crazy, right? And so there's other examples. Like I had reported when I used to work at the Washington Examiner, I had reported that USAID had previously granted money to a group closely linked to like terrorism in Southeast Asia. And that prompted USAID's Inspector General's office to launch an investigation. And so there have been issues with this agency. The question is, okay, is the administration because they've also are gutting a lot of inspectors general offices and internal watchdogs. Are they taking this too far and limiting people's ability to, investigate it? And then also, are they just going beyond the scope of, just getting into politics rather than like addressing the issues?
Yeah. When they first went after USAID, I was like, well, it makes sense because the failures there are really colorful. And no matter what a criticism comes in politically, you're always going to be able to point to some of the worst excesses, and that will get you further. It does appear that, stuff like you're reporting on here now with the State Department, that does seem at least a little bit more considered. And maybe it's just the presentation. Maybe it's just because here's a number and there's justifications and they're giving comments to you, and Rubio's on the Honestly podcast where they seem very upfront in doing it. It's not just a bunch of, reports that like, oh, people weren't allowed to come into work today. And so that means that we're assuming that there's thousands of people that are out of jobs.
Yeah, there's been I think generally, right, since the administration has been kicked off, there's been a groundswell of reporting on what may happen, or career officials and not political appointees leaking documents and drafts of documents to outlets. And then there's a flurry of stories that are like, the administration is preparing to lay off X amount of people and Y amount of people. And in many cases, there's the grain of truth to these stories, which is that it is true the administration is taking often tantamount actions to investigate agencies, and DOJ is going into agencies. DOJ has accessed private, data at a lot of these agencies, including people's personal information at agencies. But a lot of times it's like the grain of truth, but then the administration will be able to put out their message of, okay, this is what we're tangibly doing. And that happened with our State Department story. The New York Times, they published this story on Sunday, and it's saying, the State Department, according to this draft executive order, is closing most of its African bureaus overseas, and they're closing a Canadian embassy office. And the minor grain of truth to that story was that the State Department would be taking big actions, but they were relying on career officials likely who leaked information that was only really a part of a deliberation process. So it is messy. Like, there's a lot of messiness, right, in these stories. And I think the job is to try to sort through that,
make some sense of what is happening, because there's definitely a lot going on, and we are in, there are certain stories. And I would say that DC based reduction in force stories are one of them. The other is tariffs, where it's very, very hard, as somebody who has done this for a while now, to try to separate the signal from the noise, because there's not a lot of people in any kind of institutional media that, are going to either not make this a total hyperbole fest, or are good enough to get the details. And that's, one of the things, especially when I really, found you initially for your work with the Washington Examiner, because the rights ecosystem for media is over-indexed on punditry and very under-indexed when it comes to, investigative reporting, finding things and finding proof to prove the things so you can show what's going on. And it's so hard to figure out, especially with these Doge stories and, how much they're playing fast and loose with stuff, and they're walking it back, and they're saying, oh, it's a feature, not a bug. We're telling you what we know. When we make a mistake, we'll correct it. But boy, is it hard to even have any sense of how special is this? It does appear to be something that I've never remember seeing before, but also I have no idea because everybody's yelling.
I think what they're doing is definitely, we could call it historic or unprecedented. It is a major overhaul of government programs and firing all these staff and whatnot. But I think what you're saying, and I completely agree, is that it's difficult to sort out the noise. And so, we unfortunately, we live in a media environment where often one side right now, conservative media, is often in many cases writing press releases for this administration, seemingly, and celebrating all their moves and celebrating their access. And, those stories, you read those stories, and then you read, the New York Times or CNN or whatever, sort of a legacy media outlet, and you get oftentimes the opposite side of the picture. And it's the opposite side that the administration is, purportedly like attacking democracy. And this is a overhaul that is like super bad for the country.
Or the one that you're talking about, the New York Times version of that story, of the State Department story is, it has the undercurrent of a racist administration is shutting down African embassies because we don't care about Africa, right? Which is, very much coded to the audience that is extraordinarily skeptical of the Trump administration. But unfortunately, as you showed through your reporting, not exactly true. It didn't happen like that.
Yeah, I think it's tough because if one only reads Fox News and then another person only reads the New York Times, they're going to have completely different conclusions about what is happening in the government. And I honestly do think that, like, the free press and our story, that we were just trying to give people balance on, both sides. So in the example of the State Department story, we quoted Marco Rubio's secretary, and we included perspective from the State Department about why, this was a consolidation of programs and why, they believe that this is a advantageous thing to do. And then we included, various background information about how these programs, have engaged in activities that most people would believe to be advantageous, like investigating, like human rights atrocities in Syria, or creating like in one bureau that they're shutting down, creating like a data analytics dashboard to track Russia aligned like attacks or propaganda in Ukraine. I mean, people can agree and people are agree or disagree on, like, the U.S.'s role in foreign policy. But I think people look at that program and be like, okay, that sounds like not crazy. Yeah. And so, I think it is tough in the media environment, particularly with a story like this, because it's everyone just screaming and and especially particularly on Elon Musk, right? It's like the reporting is very fraught on both sides on Musk.
Which, I mean, he's not a character that makes it easy to cover because he is kind of this singular force that people have. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, he is a media baron on the side, has like a possibly pushing 20, kids in a harem situation
like 100 times a day.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. For everybody, if you are a certain kind of right-wing influencer, then you could be getting your Elon retweet with just concerning on the top of the quote tweet. Like there's
wow. He says, wow, or true.
Yeah. Wow. Or like a thinking emoji. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And then he's going. So let me ask you a Doge question here. The initial goal was 2 trillion in fraud, waste, and abuse. Then it was, well, if you aim for 2 trillion, you'll probably get 1 trillion. And now the estimation, as Elon is, he's done with his special governmental time frame, and so he is matriculating out of DC full time, apparently. Now that target is a lot lower. What do we know about what Doge has found, what they expect to find at this point?
So Musk, yesterday, major development on Wednesday, he had said on a Tesla earnings call, his company Tesla, he said that he would soon be winding his time down at Doge to 1 to 2 days per week. And that is in alignment with sort of what I expect and what others expect. Other reporters had covered, which is that Musk is something called a special government employee. And that means that he's only allowed to technically work in the government for 130 days max.
130. Yeah.
And so he was already expected to be leaving in May or June. And then Trump was asked about this yesterday about Musk leaving, and he had substantiated by saying, he talked about Musk in the past tense. He was like, Musk, he was a great help or something akin to that. So as far as what they've cut and, their goals, I mean, there's already been reporting on, Doge is a website where they list all their spending, the alleged savings for cuts. And the New York Times and other outlets had done a story, several stories on how, and it is accurate, about how Doge's website is miscounting how much it's saving in federal contracts or grants. They've often inflated those numbers significantly, or they've claimed to have cut money for contracts that were already cut under the Biden administration. So as far as the amount of money they're cutting, I think it's a little bit of a black hole because they're also not sharing a significant amount of information about federal documents themselves for these records. They're just like listing these things online, and they're not often like linkable. We can't look at them. And even if there's I think one really notable distinction here. So federal contracts work like this. So Musk may claim, hey, we're saving, their website is inflating. And the reason for this is they'll say, okay, we're saving $1 billion on this contract that the U.S. government gave out in 2018 to a nonprofit group. $1 billion, big number. But in actuality, because of how contracts work, what's happening what the reality in a lot of cases is that for that billion contract, government contracts and grants will work where, the federal officials will award a big sum. It does $1 billion, let's say like that's the maximum amount of money that they will give out. It doesn't mean that $1 billion are going to be doled out. In many cases, significantly less. And then that can even be tracked in federal spending records. You can look at how much is obligated, which means how much the government is saying we are 100% going to give this money, or how much is outlaid, which is how much they did give. And in many cases, that outlaid number is significantly less than the amount of money that Doge is claiming to save. And in other cases, compounding on that, the amount of money is for, like, the groups will say, oh yeah, we already were told like the contract wasn't being extended, so he didn't save all this money. So, the number, there's been skepticism about the numbers themselves. And like we talked about, Congress is really the body where significant cuts would need to happen in order to.
Yeah. If you're really going to affect, the national debt, it has to happen through Congress. Like, there's no other way to do it. And for what we spend more than what we bring in on an annual basis, even if you were at the Elon Musk initial goal of 2 trillion, you're still not really bending the number right there. You would have to do, you would have to do something via Congress. But right now, so the Doge goal, even if there's questions of, this is a liability maybe of $1 billion, but realistically, it was probably far less. Their savings goal is now what, under $500 billion, right? Or is it $250 billion?
They list, as Musk has said, he wants $1 trillion. And there has been reporting already on this that is I believe that's actually impossible for them to cut. And the reason for that is because President Trump issued an executive order upon taking office that related to Doge. And that executive order authorized Doge this new body to be able to investigate or cut a portion of federal spending. And that portion of federal spending, I believe, totals about 900. And there was reporting in the New York Times, it totals about, citing federal spending records, citing that category doesn't even reach $1 trillion. I think it's like 950 billion. But even if in order to cut, let's say, okay, he can cut 950 billion, that would require firing, I believe, every non-defense employee in the federal government. So that is already a huge portion. So it's going to be significantly less than they're saying. I think Musk just has kind of used these big numbers as like a ballpark to rile up the base. But yeah. Which,
on one hand, one of the things that I think is true about the Trump administration is that at the very least, you're not going to doubt the enthusiasm of the people that are inside this administration to do the thing that, is popular on the right. So if Elon went looking for $1 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse, I don't think it is lack of desire for them to find it. If anything, it might hearten people to know that maybe there isn't $1 trillion of waste, fraud, and abuse, at least in the capacity that they are looking for it.
I think just the argument of the scrutiny of Republicans would say, okay, yeah, Musk has set a big goal. is ambitious. And they might say, they won't outright say, okay, we're not going to hit that number likely, but they would say is, it's better for, we're happy that there's a movement, this big movement to cut spending. And if we cut hundreds of millions, if we cut more than that, great. So I think that their perspective and the White House's perspective will be that this is a, sort of historic movement and they want to cut spending regardless. And they might not reach this, like Musk kind of operates in his own way. He says things like we were saying, he's tweeting 1 million freaking times a day. Right. They often can't keep up with him, just like there's no way, like he's just, he's out. And we're already seeing, we've seen a lot of conflict. In fact, yesterday there was reporting that last week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Musk got into a screaming match in the West Wing. And Bessent reportedly had said something akin to criticizing how much Doge is cut and claiming it hasn't hit its targets.
It hasn't done much. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's already there's consternation, within, and externally budget experts have already sort of said okay, they're not going to reach trillion. But
yeah. I'm curious to see whether or not there's a rescission efforts for some of the stuff that they have found, because I think that would be a big thing. And the one thing that you can say about Doge is that, there is already a government accountability office that does mark things as, being worthy of terminating or trimming. And it does appear that Doge, even, in their diminished goals for finding waste, fraud, and abuse, that number is above the last time that the GAO looked for stuff. But, I guess maybe, for the budget hawks, it's like a good habit is a good habit if we're looking at these things critically, as opposed to just assuming they should balloon forever.
I think just one other thing I want to point out is I think another way that Doge, their response, they would say that they can reach bigger numbers. They would say that they can use a tool called impoundment. And so what this means is Congress appropriates money and then it goes to the White House. And something that Russell Vought, who is now the head of the White House Budget Office, has floated in the past, is supporting this notion of impoundment theory. There's a law that was signed under, I believe it was like the 70s. It was maybe under Richard Nixon.
I think Nixon. Nixon is the impoundment guy.
It was Nixon, yeah. And it was related to that the government, cannot, barring the government from spending less than Congress appropriates. And so Republicans want to, Congress will appropriate money, and then Republicans have floated this theory in the past of, okay, we can just authorize less amount of money than Congress has.
Congress sent. Yeah.
Yes, that Congress sets in place. And so I think we'll see if that ends up being a real tool they use. That's a tool that would also prompt a significant amount of legal scrutiny on them violating the law in states. But then Republicans have argued that impoundment, the act is unconstitutional itself or something, because it impinges on the power of the executive. So impoundment is the other way, perhaps, that Doge would, if they're really going to do this, they're going to have to come after the Congress's power.
So that is the money comes from Congress, goes to the executive. The executive could say, we don't need it. And the process of them saying we don't need this money is impoundment. But since everything is written into the budget of X amount of money goes to X different department, that would be yet another thing that will probably end up in the Supreme Court eventually,
it would be
many things.
It would be a huge thing. I think, if they really do go ahead with that, that could, get into being the biggest clash of the whole Trump administration.
Which is saying something, considering, when asked the question, should we do the thing? The Trump administration tends to land on yes. Yes, they should do the thing in the way.
Well, you know what, though? It's we'll see. I mean, so look, one would have said that, I think, with the tariffs. So Trump administration implemented these tariffs, and Republicans they're kind of all celebrating, and critics are like, this is, stock market's tanking. Everyone's freaking out. And they're like, you got to roll these back. And the White House and the administration is standing behind it and saying, no, this is long term. This is important. And then just like that, they fold. So I think the administration is very chaotic. Before you know it, they might say, okay, we're going to do impoundment. And then 5 days later, Elon Musk calls Trump, or Laura Loomer calls Trump. And then they bar. I mean, Laura Loomer, for example, that right wing, like far right influencer,
the new vetting czar of the White House.
She got people fired. Purportedly led to her meeting with Trump, and then there was firings in the National Security Council. So it can just take this administration, and Trump's orbit has always worked in very chaotic ways.
Yeah. I mean, the tariff. I was hearing from inside Congress, literally the day before they did the 90-day pause, that the White House was informing Congress that there was going to be no deals with major countries, that there was going to be some deals with smaller countries, and it was essentially all going to be a buying thing, that like they gave planes as an example of, hey, just buy a plane, blah, 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 make sure it's Boeing and not Airbus. And then the next day it's the 90-day pause. And now, we're stepping back from the ledge with Jerome Powell and talking about how we're probably going to lower tariffs for China as part of a larger thing. And now there's plenty of big deals. Even today, as we are recording this on Thursday, reports that deals are coming with India, and it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. So who knows? I guess they do like doing the thing, but then they also like doing other things. It doesn't matter that it is totally consistent.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to just even bringing this as a bookend back, like with the State Department. I think what we were saying about the chaos of this administration, the State Department story that we covered with the Free Press related to reorganization. It is also, this is not just, it's not this whole saga is going to continue, as far as it's going to set off, more. Congress is going to react to this in some way. They're going to send letters, probably. They're going to challenge. There's probably going to be legal challenges. There's probably going to be career officials who begin to leak to outlets on criticizing or coming after the plans. And State Department, just as far as the forward-looking part of this, they have instructed officials to craft plans in 30 days on how to reduce workforce. And then by July 1, they say State Department USAID will be fully abolished. They've used that term. And so the whole State Department thing is going to probably prompt more chaos, as far as just potentially, who knows, they might, it certainly could be feasible. They could roll back some of their reorganization, or if they realize on USAID that because they've with USAID in and of itself, they end up restoring programs that they cut in the past. They've done that, the NIH too. So this administration has to be said, they've worked very much fast and loose. Let's cut. And then they have had to roll things back. And so that might happen with the State Department. It certainly could happen with the State Department.
Well, and certainly when it comes to people leaving and commenting, I've met a few State Department people. I've seen a bunch of them on television. They don't exactly have ever struck me as shrinking violets when it comes to demonstrating where they believe they are in the pecking order of the federal government. They are a very proud, group of people. So I can only imagine that this is not going to be met quietly. Yeah,
no, definitely. We'll just have to see.
All right. Gabe Kaminsky, the Free Press. Go read the big scoop there and follow him. Where do people follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, or X, I guess it's called now, at GEKAMINSKY, GE Kaminsky. And that's my social media. And then if you go on the Free Press's website, thefp.com, you can read all our stories.
Absolutely. Keep an eye on Gabe. He does really, really good work. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And that wraps us up for the week. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young. Our editor is Will Saddleberg. One more thank you to Gabe Kaminsky of the Free Press. Go follow him. Read his work. If you'd like to email the show, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Follow me on X, Justin R. Young. The only place where you can get our bonus content is takepoliticsseriously.com for $3 a week. Price of a cup of coffee. If you would buy me a cup of coffee once a week so I could sit in your car twice a week and talk to you more about politics, well, supporting the show is for you. Head on over to Take Politics Seriously. Sign up. Get our 2 bonus episodes each and every week. Rain or shine, they always happen. And guys, I got a hell of a travel schedule next week. We are going to do our best to keep everything up to date, but it's going to be a challenge. But I will do it. I will do it. Oh, I'll do it, friends. I'm going to give you the political commentary that you so richly deserve because you go ahead and support us. But if you want to get your name read at the end of the show, well, it's only one way to do it. That's in our Titanic founding tier. L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes, oh yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Stephen, and Zombie Doc. You want your name read? One place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Well, we're going to have a hell of a week next week. I might have some stories for you because I am heading up to old DC to go attend the Substack adjacent White House Correspondents Association party. So I might be rubbing elbows with some Substack elite. Be very interesting. And then I got some business out on the West Coast. And then I'm going to end the week on Thursday in Indianapolis, Indiana, to watch the Western Boone Junior Senior High School do a spring concert wherein they will be wielding 40 automatones. If you have never heard of an automaton, do yourself a favor and Google it. This is an outgrowth of a ridiculous comment that my co-host and friend of this program, Andrew Heaton, said on We're Not Wrong, where he said that he would like to outfit his high school with automatones. We had an actual band leader, a music teacher at a high school, at Western Boone Junior Senior High School, a lovely woman by the name of Leslie. She wrote into the show and said, I'll do it. And that was several months ago. Her kids have been rehearsing ever since. I've been sent pictures. And this Thursday, at their spring concert, with local media in attendance, we have gotten some bites on local media that's going to be there. We will watch 40 automatones at the same time. What a time to be alive. That is if I'm alive, because it's going to be a lot of traveling between now and then. But till next time, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss. Oh, 3.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.